Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session with Dr. Knouse. And Dr. Knouse is an associate professor of Spanish, the University Supervisor of Foreign Language Education, and the Executive Reflection Fellow at Furman University. She's facilitated more than a dozen workshops on reflective practices and issues related to second language pedagogy. Dr. Knouse's research interests are social justice in the language classroom, students' attitude and motivation toward language learning, and variation in native and non-native speech. Dr. Knouse regularly presents on these topics at the ACTFL annual convention and has published articles in foreign language annals, Hispania, Dimension, among other venues. Furthermore, as a firm supporter of experiential learning, Dr. Knouse has co-directed 4 study abroad programs to Spain, regularly integrates service and community-based learning into her courses, and collaborates with her undergraduate students on research projects. So with that, we're looking forward to your presentation today, Dr. Knouse. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for being here today. I know that we are tasked with a lot more than we usually are at this point. And so I am very appreciative of the opportunity to talk with you today, to work together, and for the opportunity that FLAVA has given me to share some of my interests. But really, I also want to see this time as co-constructing what we know about social justice and language education together. I am somebody who is very invested and interested and dedicated to bringing these topics into my classroom, but I'm certainly not the expert on high who knows it all. So I know that people are doing very innovative things in their respective classrooms, and I want to invite everybody to share together and to pool our resources together during this presentation and afterward, should you wish. But first, I'd like to get to know you all a little bit better. I'm going to attempt to do a Kahoot. If you have your phones next to you, if you don't, it's okay. But I will share my screen and we're going to try a Kahoot just so that I know who's here today, and that will inform me how I shift some of the topics. So I think we've all heard this music before. If you can go to kahoot.it and type in the code, you can put in whatever name you would like to. And this is not a quiz, this is simply a poll. So it doesn't say who responds to what. About 10 more seconds and then we'll go ahead and get started. And if for some reason you're not able to get on and you would like to use the chat feature of Zoom, please feel free to do so, and I will take a look in the chat. Okay, let's start. So the first one is just seeing how we're doing right now. How are you doing in your present circumstances? Happy, positive, hanging in, I've been better, I'm struggling. right, so overall, we're okay. I know for myself, sometimes I go from one end to the other end in the same day, so it kind of depends on the day, but this is helpful just to see how we're doing right now. So thank you for that. And I apologize for the lack of all languages I was able to put on. I put the ones that are primarily instructed, but I don't want to be exclusive. So I apologize for that. But French, Spanish, German. For the teachers who are teaching other languages, could you tell me in the chat or unmute yourselves to let me know what other languages are represented, if that's possible? Latin. Okay, keep on, great, keep on adding your comments. I will say that there is a Spanish focus to the vast majority of the examples. I'm drawing on some of my work and the resources with which I'm most familiar. So just wanted to put that out there, but I also hope that they can serve as a springboard off of which you can think of how a particular activity might fit within your particular language. So, and then finally, how confident are you with incorporating social justice in your language classes? Very moderately not confident, or this is something new. Okay. Well, good. It seems like we're going to have some great discussion. We have people who are very seasoned with social justice topics, and we also have people who are starting. So I think that's great as well. And I really hope that we can share and learn from one another today. So thank you for that. That really helps me know how to shape some of the comments and some of the discussion for today. But this helps me to get to know you a little bit better. And just so that you get to know me a little bit better, as Eric said, I am a Spanish professor at Furman, but before that, I taught 4 years in secondary, 2 years right outside of DC, so not too far from Virginia, and 2 years in a county in Maryland as well. So I do have experience in that arena, and I am in the secondary schools here at Greenville County as part of my position as the university supervisor for candidates who are certifying. We have programs in Spanish and in French. I also wanted to just touch a little bit on my journey of incorporating social justice into my Spanish classes. And it definitely wasn't that way. It wasn't a perspective that I adopted when I first started teaching secondary. As a matter of fact, I had very little pedagogical training when I started. I went back and I got my certification later, but I can tell you that it was not anything that was necessarily on my mind. I touched on, of course, cultural topics, but not in the way that I do now. It really wasn't until I started studying language variation, linguistic diversity, freedom, discrimination in my doctoral work when it became more apparent to me that we need to talk about more of these issues explicitly and get students engaged in them as well. Also, engaging in service learning in the local community propelled my curiosity and my desire to want to know more of how to incorporate social justice in my classes. So I'm still in my journey. I am not at the destination, but I definitely want to learn more. In terms of what we're going to hopefully learn today, the learning outcomes for this workshop are: I can describe what social justice is in an educational setting. I can articulate the connection between social justice topics and the World Readiness Standards of learning languages or language learning. And I can design a small activity that targets an area of social justice as related to the standards. The essential questions that we will be addressing are: how is social justice education connected to language learning and teaching? And how can I begin or continue to embed social justice elements in existing units, lessons, or activities? And what are the outcomes of adopting such an approach? So what kind of consequences, benefits, or challenges might we have as we do this? A brief agenda. I'll first discuss a few key ideas related to social justice in general and how it connects to education and language education in particular. I will describe specific connections to the standards, and then we'll also go into more best practices with more specific examples of how I've used it in different classes and how others have used it. I should say that many of these ideas are not mine. I have borrowed a lot from those who have pioneered this field, so I really want to acknowledge that as well. I really hope that we have time for brainstorming and drafting in breakout rooms, and that we can share some of our ideas together. And if we have time, questions and answers, and certainly if we do not, I'm sharing my email at the end of this presentation. So I definitely encourage you to connect with me. I'd also like to start off by presenting this image. This is an image that I use in every class that I teach. Language learning is inherently vulnerable. We're asking our students to make mistakes constantly, and I try to let them know that a little discomfort is okay. We certainly don't want them in the panic zone. That is not productive, and nobody learns when they're in the panic zone. But we do want to feel a little uncomfortable, and we might feel some of that today as well. But if we're too comfortable, we won't see a lot of growth. So I hope that we're a little uncomfortable and that we challenge ourselves to think about some of these topics. I also started with a disclaimer that I am not the resident expert or the only person who can contribute to this discussion. So I really believe in pulling our resources together. I am not the best with presenting and manning the chat at the same time. So if you have ideas to share throughout the chat, I know that we can save Zoom chat, so that also might be a place that resources are shared as well. So if I don't get to talk about it, it's still there documented. So please feel free to use that as much as possible. And I do try and go into these discussions acknowledging these areas. So one thing that I would like to know, if you could add to the chat, if you want to, or you can think about it individually and write them down, but it would be helpful to know, what are your personal goals for today? And framed in another way, what do you want to learn? What do you hope to get out of our time together? So if you take a few minutes, write down some ideas, and if you feel so inclined, if you share them in the chat, that would be great. And I can look up here, okay, to hear what other folks are doing. No, that always helps. Hispanic Heritage Month, fresh ideas, how to share social justice issues with my students, get useful materials. Ideas from others, specific ways for conversations, stay in the target language. Yeah, and that's something that we'll think about. Okay, strategies, more inclusive classrooms, age-appropriate conversations, certainly. Promote language participation, background, okay. Ideas from others and keeping in the target language. To take the Guria, after Hispanic Heritage Month. Future teacher, okay. Advocate for social, okay. Gringureria, All right, well, thank you for sharing this. I do hope that we'll have time to share and to see what we are doing, especially in breakout rooms. And I hope that there are some useful resources for you. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to share a Google Doc that I have prepared with many of the links and materials that I referenced during this presentation. So they will be available to you at that point. So thank you for this. Also, if we can use the chat, to you, what is your definition of social justice, and why might we incorporate it into the classroom? What might be a reason, a compelling reason to do so? So you can think about it. And first we can start with the definition of social justice. So to you, what does that mean? If you feel inclined to share. I had initially thought that folks might be in their home schools, distanced, but still in their pods. So I'm adjusting on the fly a little bit, but I think the chat feature might work for this. Equity and inclusion, recognize and acknowledge the marginalized, all races, religions, genders have equal inclusion. I respect you for who you are. Understanding power and its relationship to languages. Beyond assimilation, building empathy and compassion in all. Equity and equal access. These are great. Giving the students the opportunity to share their culture and give it the relevance that it deserves. Equity, inclusion, how to create equity status. Great. History cannot be excluded. Certainly. Okay. If you have any additional ideas, keep putting them in there. And then why incorporate social justice in a language classroom? I think there's some allusion to that above, but why explicitly you would intentionally do this? To build intercultural communicative competency. Yep, there are many overlaps there. Bridge building, language is about communication with others, hits the community standard. Yes, give students voice. Yep. Yep, this is great. Okay. Empathy. Some perspective regarding various points of view. No single way to understand cultures. Yeah. To give context. Turn stereotypes upside down. Yeah. Yeah, certainly teaching culture, you know, why do we incorporate what we incorporate, and thinking critically if that's reinforcing stereotypes, how can we challenge some of those so our students have a deeper, more nuanced understanding? Right. Okay, these are wonderful, wonderful ideas. Thank you very much for sharing them. And I think that really primes us for this discussion on, you know, what it is and why we are here learning about how to do it. So just so that I start with some of the tenets of social justice, I wanted to go through a few ideas that informed my practice and that stood out to me as very relevant. Nieto is cited as saying, social justice is a philosophy, an approach, and actions that embody treating all people with fairness, respect, dignity, and generosity. And so that gets at a lot of what we said in the chat. Simply put by Osborne, who was one of the pioneers of incorporating and publishing on social justice in the language classroom, it is the sharing of social power and benefits equitably. Also in a recent book by Sensoy and D'Angelo, it does not have a world language education focus, but it does have an educational focus. It adds to this definition by asking the question, from whose perspective is something fair and equitable? So are we seeing it the same? If there's differences, why are there differences? So I think that is an important addition to these definitions. Social justice in an educational realm by the National Educational Association is about distributing resources fairly and treating all students equitably so that they feel safe and secure physically and psychologically. So not only are we bringing in broader topics into our discussion, into our classrooms, but we're treating students in the same way. And by bringing in their previous lived experiences, their identities, their backgrounds, we are creating that space in which they do feel safe and secure. Nieto also states, and this is in the resource by Glenn, Wellesley, and Wassell, Words in Action. There is now the second edition out. I highly recommend it. That social justice education challenges, confronts, and disrupts misconceptions, untruths, and stereotypes, which is what we hope to do as language educators, provides all students with resources to learn to their full potential, draws on the talents and strengths of students. So one thing that Osborne stressed in a webinar this last May through ACTFL's Critical and Social Justice Approaches SIG special interest group is that we are co-constructing knowledge and meaning together, as opposed to the teacher just banking, putting into the bank their knowledge into their students. So it's very important that we're working in concert and collaboratively with students. And social justice education promotes critical thinking, and I added reflection. And we'll go over why reflection is so important when we talk about issues related to social justice. This slide is from the webinar that I just referenced from Osborne. This really resonated with me to tease out some of the myths about what social justice is in world language education. I'll read a few, but you can also look over the rest. It is not indoctrination, but rather we're having students think critically. Because knowledge in schools is not neutral, and teaching in and of itself is a political act. It is not a democratic or Republican agenda, but rather is about fairness for all, and in particular our students, because we know that society is structured to be inclined towards injustice. And there are some other myths that Osborne teases out for us that I think are important to understand. And also, when we explain why we do what we do, I think we can draw on some of these ideas. So incorporating social justice education in a world language or language classroom allows students and teachers to critically examine how systems of power, privilege, and oppression affect attitudes towards languages and cultures, especially in the context of where we are regionally and nationally. It allows for inclusivity of students' native cultures, students' backgrounds, the local community, and the many cultures within the target language cultures. So many times our students have a monolithic view of what culture is, and incorporating social justice education gives these topics more nuance and depth. And this is more general, but certainly applicable to the language classroom. It allows the classroom to be a place that is life-sustaining and mind-expanding, a place of liberating mutuality where teacher and student together work in partnership. So again, working together, co-constructing knowledge is a crucial element of social justice education. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of L.J. Randolph. He is a professor of Spanish at UNC Wilmington and somebody who I look up to as a pioneer in this field. He was recently on a podcast on the podcast by Stacey Margarita Johnson through Vanderbilt, titled We Teach Languages. And I have a link to this episode. It's about 25 minutes long. And I got a lot out of it, but he articulates very well how the language classroom is really primed to incorporate social justice topics and themes. So there is a really nice alignment, as he states, there is a really nice alignment with what we do in terms of our curriculum or curricula, the national standards, and this alignment can really be powerful with social justice topics. And it's not an additional thing that we have to check off our boxes. It can really fit in seamlessly. And one thing that I found to be very liberating and helpful was, he stated, it doesn't have to be a change the world activity. We can start small and build from there. So we do know that a lot of the small efforts do contribute to the global effort, but don't feel that you have to do a radical shift in how you teach or a complete paradigm change. It can be a small tweak, and we'll talk about that. And it is a perfect way of relating the content of what we're doing in our classes to students' communities, to our local communities, and to their lived experiences. So take a look at that podcast should you wish to. Here in this section of the presentation, I wanted to present some overarching ideas of how each goal area can be targeted through social justice. They're pretty abstract, broad suggestions, but then we'll get to more of the specific as we move forward. With communication and the three modes, we know we have interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. I found that this was, for me, one of the most seamless ways of incorporating social justice issues. Now, it does depend on students' level and the scaffolding that we need to do. But it is possible to set up interpersonal scenarios in which there is a discussion of the issue. We can look at authentic texts to tap into the interpretive mode, and also with authentic products in the presentational mode, students can orally or in a written form, articulate an action plan for what they're going to do next, or some sort of advocacy effort to support one of the topics that we're talking about. And so I'll give more specific ideas, but those broadly are some ways to tap into the 3 modes. And this also is another seamless one. I mean, this is what we do inherently. We want to promote intercultural or global competence, and we do this through looking at the products, practices, and perspectives. One thing that I show my students in all levels at the beginning of the semester is the cultural iceberg, which I'm sure you've seen. But a lot of times our students think that, oh, culture, I'm going to be looking at art and literature and food and many ostensible elements of the big C of culture, which is certainly what we do. But there's all of these other layers of culture underneath the iceberg and these nuances that are also key components. I tell students that I know some things, but I'm eager to learn more, and I don't know them all. In particular, the Spanish-speaking world, as I'm sure you know, the Francophone world and many of the other languages that we teach, there's so much variety out there in terms of cultural practices and influences that it's impossible to know everything and to be an expert. And it's also whose perspective are we highlighting in our classes too. So if we look underneath the iceberg, whose perspectives of gender roles are we highlighting, notions of beauty, etc. So that's just something to think about when we're looking at culture. And very quickly, I'm not going to go over all of this, but to read some of the highlighted areas of ACTFL's explanation of global competence. We want speakers and our students to interact with awareness, sensitivity, empathy, and knowledge without judgment, be aware of cultural differences, and act respectfully. And that goes hand in hand with what we want through social justice perspectives. Connections. Social justice is very interdisciplinary, of course. Somebody mentioned history. We need to incorporate history, political science, sociology. All disciplines can be incorporated into the classroom, especially as we embed them in our overall thematic units. We also want to make sure that we are highlighting underrepresented perspectives in groups in these interdisciplinary topics and thematic units. So we do that through the connection standards. And comparing, so not only are we comparing target language and native cultures, but we're also comparing the multiple perspectives within the target cultures. So ample opportunity to do that as well. In communities, somebody also in the chat mentioned to reach the community standard. Yes, this is the crux of social justice. We want to bring the community into our classroom, and then once our students are finished with our class, have them go out into the community and engage with sensitivity, empathy, and respect. So this is also an essential component. We can do this through talking with members of our local communities. Now with technology, we have the opportunity of, if it's possible, if it's available, to connect via Zoom or another video conferencing app, if it's accessible to everybody, and then start in the local community to forge collaborations and reciprocal relationships. That's something that I think goes a long way. You can do that through service learning, collecting oral histories, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but the community's standards are simply something that is a key component of what we're doing. I don't know how many are familiar with Teaching Tolerance. It is an organization that has multiple resources, fantastic publications, and they have a set of standards as well. So to quote them, tolerance is respect, acceptance, and appreciation of the rich diversity of our world's cultures, our forms of expression and ways of being human. And that's language teaching, right? That's what we want our students to know. And tolerance is harmony and difference. So I have this website for you all on the document that I created with resources. And I also wanted to, I'm not going to read the standards, but Teaching Tolerance does have their own set of standards with 4 primary anchors. Those standards related to identity, and this is where we can make our students feel safe and welcomed into our classroom when we recognize and validate and bring in their identities, especially those who normally or in the past have not been accepted based on how they self-identify. Diversity, and just reading number 7, students will develop language and knowledge to accurately and respectfully describe how people are both similar to and different from each other and their identity groups. So this is right up the alley of intercultural competence, but you can see those substandards there. Justice and action. So not only do we want students to become more aware, knowledgeable, informed, critical, right? To apply critical thinking, but we also want them to be agents of change, right? We want them to be advocates. Simply reading number 18, students will speak up with courage and respect when they or someone else has been hurt or wronged by bias. So simple but difficult things that students might not do normally, we want to try to eventually instill in them. But these are some of the standards promoted by Teaching Tolerance that you might want to consider as you're approaching new techniques with social justice. So I wanted to take a moment and to see, we have this information to see if there's any questions, but also to think about what for you is the biggest roadblock to incorporate more social justice topics, issues, activities in your language classroom. So, yeah. So if you want to take a minute or two to think about maybe some challenges or obstacles that you have confronted, or if it's simply just more information, more techniques, limited proficiency, students' reactions, yeah. Right, concerns about making missteps. Yeah, I mean, we're going to make missteps. I know I certainly have. I continue to do so. I will continue to do so. I have some possible recommendations for how to mitigate some of that, but I mean, I think simply accepting that we're going to do that is, you know, part of it. Having enough knowledge as to not offend, parents' complaints, yeah, certainly I've thought about that and confronted that. Right. Having enough time to cover it well. Living in a district that's 96% Caucasian. Right. Not enough time, tight schedule. Okay. Looks like the video link has been changed. Oh. Right. So this is, you know, with limited proficiency, that is a perpetual issue, especially when, you know, we're talking about beginning levels. I also think that for some of what we discuss, English might be the preferred option, and I will take my 10% of English in, my classroom. I will gladly allocate it for that. And I will do my other 90% in the target language, but there might be some things that we prefer English for. Okay, but yes, proficiency is certainly something to consider and could be an obstacle. I will say that I am Dr. Randolph, who I've been citing, he just presented a webinar on social justice and has some good materials for Spanish too. And I have a link to that. And I think that that could give some insight of how that could be done in an effective way. Right. 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 And also knowing to expect these reactions, I think can help. And we'll go over maybe how to lay some ground rules with students, or how we can approach it with students that may or may not be successful. Great. Okay, so for the next, I guess, 30 minutes, I have some tips and a task for you. So to start our discussion, the tip that I have in terms of incorporating world language standards with social justice and social justice standards is using the best practices of language instruction. So really drawing on what we already know is effective, and what we are already doing is a certain way to amp up our efforts with bringing in social justice. So I'd like to turn that back over to you first to see how you have done this and how you might do it. Which best practices could be considered in particular when designing social justice activities and units? So if you want to put those in the chat, what might you draw on that is effective as a language educator to really get into some of these topics? So if you have any ideas, you can put them in the chat. A minute. Can I rephrase the question? Okay. What do you do as a language educator? What techniques, what pedagogical approaches do you already do that could be a good entryway for a social justice topic? Is it how you structure your class? Is it how you interact with students? Is it, you do these things already, but what are some areas that you can latch on to? Proper contextualization, right? Start simple. Right. To the Francophone world, right. Scaffolding, yes, absolutely. And students are going to need a lot of scaffolding. Is the material and subject matter diverse, equitable, and inclusive? Questioning our practices. Socratic seminar, absolutely. Asking questions, right? Critical thinking. Okay, I think these are great ideas. Colonization, right? I mean, history, right? Asking Native speakers for their input, respecting and praising diversity within Hispanic cultures, cultural contexts. Ask students personal experiences that they want to share, absolutely. So a lot of these ideas are going to touch on some of the recommendations that I have. Again, they're not the only ones. I think they complement a lot of what you are already doing as well. So keep on adding to that chat. Some ideas that I came up with are: one, reflect students' experiences in the curriculum. So again, going back to the co-construction, making sure that they feel represented in what we're doing and that they have a say, but bringing in who they are, their identities, and their experiences is key. We know that, again, the effective filter needs to be low for input to be accepted and for them to feel motivated in our classes. So there has to be a big element of trust there. And in order to get into some of these issues, or it's going to be superficial and they might clam up. So we do this every day. We connect with our students through language, through culture, through connections. This is what we do as language teachers to allow them to lower their filters and to produce for us. So doing what we're already doing with that, critical thinking and reflection. We want them not to just stay at the lower order of Bloom's taxonomy. We want to make sure that they're tapping into those higher order skills and using authentic texts, resources, and assessments, IPAs, something that has a real world purpose. I don't like the term real world, but maybe beyond the class purpose could be motivating and is certainly effective through backwards design. So we do that when we unit plan. And I will get into some particular examples. So to touch on to the first one, making sure that students are represented and to reflect who they are. So and this touches on the majority of the standards. So we want to make sure that there's a discussion of their identities, their intersectionality, their experiences, and bring that in to the topics that we select, getting to know our students. We do this at the beginning of each year for each class, and making sure that we're doing this to tailor what angle that we might take on a particular topic, and to make sure that we're doing it in a sensitive way. Also, this is not necessarily related to students' lived experiences, but we do want to present our students with groups that have historically been marginalized and excluded from being a representation of target language cultures. We want to include different linguistic varieties, and I'll go into that into a little bit, making sure that our communities are represented, all communities of the languages and the cultures that we're experts on. And with that, we need to make sure that it's relevant to students' local and regional communities as much as we possibly can. We also know that there are virtual communities. So if a local target language community is not there or as prevalent, then connecting students through virtual communities is key as well. To give you an example of including different varieties. So we want to make sure that students are equipped with the linguistic and cultural knowledge to engage with native speakers outside of our classroom. And a lot of times we teach a certain variety of our language that is not always, sometimes it is, but it's not always representative of what they're going to encounter if they go down the street or go into the market or have an informal conversation with somebody. And so something that we hear a lot is, oh, I took X years of Spanish and I can't speak it. And so, you know, I think, you know, critically, why is that the case sometimes? And how can we make it more relevant? I'm forgetting the name of the authors, Faircloud and Gutierrez in 2006. I don't have that citation, but I can add it. It's a Google Doc, it's a live document. I can do that when I get home. They want us to avoid teaching sanitized language because it's exclusive, it's exclusionary, and we're not equipping our students with the skills to be competent in the language. Here's one example, actually I just saw today, of the Central American local community reclaiming the use or just the representation of vos versus tu. I don't know if I've really ever seen in the textbooks that I've used, vos included robustly as much as other pronouns are. Why, right? Why is it not when millions and millions of Central Americans and Latin Americans use vos as their preferred pronoun? So if there happens to be, and this is just an example, if there happens to be a substantial Central American population in your community, teach vos, right? Make sure that students are using it and know what it is. And we do it in a way that makes sense and we're not confusing, right? But they, you know, if it's present in their communities, we need to bring that in and make sure that that is represented. So trust in the classroom. What do you do if you can type in a couple ideas? What do you do now to establish trust with your students, to allow them to, you know, lower their guard and to sometimes be silly or to engage in serious conversations and to trust you as a teacher? If you could maybe type in an idea or two, that would be great. Yeah, be humble, admit mistakes, absolutely, love them, yeah. Praise efforts, be normal, be present. Yeah, invest in them, connect, welcome mistakes, absolutely, celebrate them. This is giving me goosebumps. Believe in them, show interest in their interests. Yeah, no, these are wonderful. Along with, you know, respect, yes. And this is just something to go along with these answers. We know the effective filter. We know that if it's up, learning probably won't take place. And if it's down, learning will more likely take place. This is more in reference to input, but I think this can be applied to all learning. So when we're not doing all of the wonderful things that you're mentioning in the chat, we know that they're going to shut down and they're not going to be there as we want them to be because we weren't there for them. So I show them this at the beginning of each semester. I tell them that I'm learning just as much alongside of you as you do, you know, different reports and investigations on culture. I don't know a lot of the things that they come to present on. I tried to be transparent and upfront with them. If I'm trying something new, I let them know. And I try to model humility and respect for them. And by being transparent, we are being kind to them. So clear is kind. If something is not working, you can say, hey guys, hey, this isn't working. Let's shift gears. And as you have mentioned in the chat, they respond to that. They know what sincere is. And I think that goes a long way. So some of the fears of making mistakes, if we have that trust and they know that you have their best interests in mind, they're going to be okay, right? For the most part. Sensoy and D'Angelo, in their book on social justice education, have an open letter to students. And this is for, I think, post-secondary students. We compare this down to students at their level, but they recommend for students to adopt these mindsets. And I think it helps also for us, just to be reminded, I know for me and for my students, I think just having these conversations and giving them suggestions of how we might need to frame our discussions in order to progress in our knowledge, our collective knowledge. So strive for intellectual humility. Everyone has an opinion. Opinions are not the same as informed knowledge. Let go of anecdotal evidence and examine patterns. So the systemic is what we're trying to get at here. Use your reactions as entry points for gaining deeper self-knowledge. So why, I know in the past I've gotten defensive. Why was I defensive? And that's, you know, and we think critically within ourselves, we can, you know, come up with some important insights. And especially recognize how your social positions inform your reactions to your instructor and the course content, and also to, you know, our students if we're thinking of ourselves in these. Great. So I do also want to touch on reflection and the crucial role of reflection in social justice education. And thank you guys. James Coda, in his article, Disrupting Standard Practice, Queering the World Language Classroom, stated, consistent reflection on our practice and the roles of discourse and power in influencing our interpretations of the world can serve to remind us to challenge both our students' implicit bias as well as our own. And these biases serve to perpetuate inequalities for students of non-normative identities. So it's imperative. We need to reflect. And so the following question is, how do we do that in an effective way? This is a little acronym that I've come up with to help me stay on track with some best practices of reflection. We can think of it as cliff. I'm hoping that people don't go off that cliff, but are going up to the cliff and are summiting. That's how I choose to see it. Reflection needs to be critical, and there's a double meaning there. We need to connect it with learning outcomes. It needs to be integrative, not just one-offs or not connected to other elements. It should be on a regular basis, but you know, there's a little caveat there, and the feedback needs to be done in a particular way, or it could be approached in a particular way. So in terms of critical, this, I don't know if anybody has seen this model before. This is the deal model. And it's a really nice model to latch onto when we're thinking about how to create reflective activities for our students. Certainly we can pose prompts and, you know, we don't have to necessarily adopt a model, but we certainly can. So in an educational experience, first we need to describe a topic. That needs to happen. But what I saw before I adopted something like DEAL, describe, examine, and articulate learning, my students were simply describing. They weren't critically thinking. And so the description is an important component. They have to describe, but it's not simply a report. They need to analyze. And what they need to analyze has to connect, as you see here, examine or analyze the different goals that we have for them in our courses. So this happens to be one from a service learning course. So in service learning, there could be personal growth, civic engagement and learning, and academic learning as well. So not always in the same activity, but you're going to want to hone in on those areas in order to really get students critically processing the content emotionally, intellectually, and this is the crux of it all, articulating how the learning will be utilized moving forward. So, okay, you have all this, now what, right? What are you going to do in light of it? Ash and Clayton have some great resources. I have a link to that article. So it's critical in that, you know, we're getting up there on Bloom's taxonomy. So we want them evaluating, analyzing, eventually creating. So they're working on the cognitive and metacognitive abilities that's going to inform how they think and act in the future. So reflection does that when it's set up properly. And the other side, the second meaning of critical, is that we're bringing in critical theory. So we're looking at mainstream dominant structures and breaking those down. So Brookfield stated, critical theory is analyzing commonly held ideas and practices for the extent to which they perpetuate economic and social inequity, deny compassion, foster a culture of silence, and prevent people from realizing a sense of common connectedness. So not only do we want them to think critically, we want them to also be critical in how they approach the topics that we're presenting to them. Learning outcomes. So this is the L. So we have to have a tight course alignment. So we're not going to pose a question or have an activity if it's not directly related to what we want students to learn, okay? So we have a tight alignment between what we do in the classroom, active learning, teaching and learning practices, and this is where reflection fits in. It gives us a lot of formative assessment information. So where are we? Are there some misunderstandings or stereotypes being reinforced? We want to be very careful with calling people out, but in a collective, there could be certainly a discussion of, hey, I see this idea popping up. Why might we reframe this, or why do we think that way? So it can give us some good formative information, and hopefully it helps us achieve our learning goals. It should be integrative, so woven together, connected to disciplines that you know that they're taking outside of your course, other disciplines that we're connecting in our course, and to their lived experiences, and in that there is power. So having them connect something that they've experienced to what we're reflecting on will certainly make the most meaning for them. So frequency, not too frequent. We don't want to have reflection fatigue, but when we start with students, they're not good reflectors, right? It's a difficult skill to be introspective. And especially, if we're talking about different ages, but it can't happen just at the end. We have to, again, weave it in and do it. I like to call it stealth reflection. So they're not necessarily writing something formal, but we're talking about it, and that can be done depending on the level in the target language, or if it's necessary in English. You want to vary the modalities of reflection. So again, some people just think of writing something. That is certainly a valid form. Journals are fine. Small prompts, group conversations, large class conversations, but not making it another add-on for them either is a way of making it more successful. But it needs to be done on a, somewhat regular basis, but do not overdo it. That won't be effective. And I'm using Fink's term of fidelity feedback when we do circle back with them. So, this is the one that gives me the most anxiety: frequent and immediate. So having the opportunity to do that is challenging, and for me, it doesn't always happen, but I strive for that. It's discriminating and loving as well. And one way that students can give us feedback is through Brookfield's classroom critical incident questionnaire. So periodically, I ask my students in an anonymous survey, at what moment did they feel most engaged or distant with what was happening, and what action from students or teacher did you find most affirming, helpful, or confusing? And then Brookfield recommends to share that with the class, so they know that they have a voice as well in what's going on. And then you have information on how things are being received, what's the muddiest point. I think Brookfield does this every week. You can do this, with whatever frequency is right for your classroom. But this is a nice way of getting feedback from them to you. So lastly, with the best practices of language teaching and teaching in general is backwards design, looking at our situational factors and going from there to our learning goals, to our assessments, and then to our daily lessons. But also authentic assessments and materials as a key component of that is necessary as well. So again, here's just the structure of backwards design. We know what our factors are, who is in our class. Again, bringing students' lived experiences, identities into the conversation, designing active learning and reflective activities, assessments that are in alignment with that, and hopefully making sure that we have that tight course design to achieve our learning goals for significant learning. And one thing I will say that I forgot to mention is active learning and reflection undergird transformative education. So we certainly can tap into that for social justice education. I wanted to give you an example of something that I've done with students, and this could be in a Spanish 3 class that taps into linguistic diversity in the Spanish-speaking world. Many times students are not aware of the diverse nature of language in different areas within the Spanish-speaking world. This happens to be a focus on the Andean region, but certainly you can do any country or area of your languages regions, but this happens to be one on the Andean region, and with the essential question of what is linguistic diversity. Many of our students haven't had to think about that before if they're Anglo speakers. Some have, right? But I know that I teach in a predominantly white institution, and that hasn't necessarily been something that my students had to think about before, but some have. And how does this concept play out in the Andean region of Latin America? So certain components, authentic assessments, 3 modes of communication, bringing in students' own autobiographies, their linguistic autobiographies, so making sure that they're represented. I incorporated some theoretical information and key concepts related to language ideology from Rosina Lippi-Green, which is fantastic. Also engaging with community members, having the opportunity to learn humbly from them and to reflect critically. And this taps into all of the standards, frankly, and certainly all of the goal areas, maybe not every single standard. I find that lifelong learning is kind of hard to prove, but the majority of them. Okay, and also there is an alignment with the social justice standards. So tapping into identity, justice, diversity, and action. And we'll see that in one of the authentic assessments. So to see some examples of how we can tap into the 3 modes of communication through this unit on linguistic diversity, they could talk with one another, compare and contrast the status of Spanish in the US and Spain with the status of Spanish in the Andean region of Latin America. They could also articulate their next steps of what they might take if they want to advocate for bilingual education in Latin America or the United States. That's something that we studied in our unit. There is a documentary for the interpretive mode called Minerita, which is about women miners in Latin America and the Andean region. They could identify some of the concepts or forms or the characteristics that we talk about and what social justice issues are at play that they see in the movie. In terms of presentational, they could write and reflect in the target language on their variety of their native language and how much it is a part of who they are as a person. And this is the linguistic autobiography. They were really, really well done. And for the most part, a lot of the students, not all, but for a good part of the students, they had never thought about that before, how their language or languages really connect to their sense of self. And if relevant, if they deemed it relevant, discuss any instances of feeling marginalized for their way of speech. So some did make some mention of that, and that was certainly incorporated into our discussion as they were comfortable. And then another potential presentational one-way delivery is craft and deliver a presentation to other Spanish speakers in the target language about linguistic diversity and discrimination. So especially with varieties of Spanish spoken in the United States, and this is something that I also study as part of my research, there are purist approach with purist, I guess, ideologies and perspectives within the Spanish-speaking community that you need to speak one or the other, and any type of mixing or influence, lexical or structural, is bad. So informing others of, well, this is more representative of contact speech. It's not that anybody's doing anything bad. Acknowledging the value of you know, everybody's speech could also be something that is beneficial. So we also looked at, in terms of an authentic text, we looked at this text on Roxana Quispe Collantes, who was the first person to defend her dissertation in Quechua. We looked at that, as well as Minerita, which was a documentary, as I explained before, tapping into the interpretive mode and doing follow-up activities. If we want to think about a full-blown IPA, there is certainly a way of doing that. I didn't do it in the IPA structure, but it could be pared down to that. What we did do that I would like to present with a presentational was students developed a public service announcement, which is a very short video to inform the local community for the greater good. And so I did give the students the option to do it in Spanish or English. They opted to do it in English to reach more people, and I was okay with that. But they created a public service announcement about non-dominant languages, the importance of inclusion linguistically, and we'll see if Zoom cooperates and allows me to show you that right now. So I might have to stop share for a second, and I will see what I can do. I think this will be okay. This one is titled Race to Bilingualism, and I have the links for my students' other projects in case you want to view them. Let me share again. Okay, do you all see that? Yeah, okay. I'm scared it could be not the best quality. If it's bad, I'll just stop it and then have you all view it on your own. But I've had hit or miss experiences with videos on Zoom.
Knowledge of a second language is widely believed to be essential for success in an increasingly intercultural world. Many countries have begun to implement bilingual education programs for this exact reason. For instance, the Spanish Ministry of Education, together with the British Council, created the Bilingual Education Project in 1996. Their goal is to prepare children for participation in the global world through literacy and fluency in both English and Spanish. Students receive 60% of the instruction in Spanish and 40% in English. By 2014, the number of primary schools providing bilingual education in Spain had climbed to 316. So how is America competing? Here in South Carolina, only 2 of the 626 public elementary schools offer bilingual education. Blythe Academy in Greenville County is one of these schools. Students in the magnet program study half of their subjects in English and the other half in either Spanish or French. America, it's time to catch up and make bilingual education a priority.
Were you able to see that okay? Yeah. So again, not in the target language. There are examples of ones in the target language, but they wanted to reach more people. And so I was okay with that. But there could certainly be advocacy efforts in the target language to support communicative competence and progression and proficiency. Okay, let me get this back up real quick. I'm not sharing my screen, am I? I should know. Okay. Okay, I think I'm good here. Okay, so finally, in the target language, they did their reflections. This linguistic autobiography was crucial to establish the foundation of cultivating empathy. Since in this particular experience, they also had some service learning options. And so to process service learning, reflection is necessary, not optional, to certainly ensure that stereotypes aren't being reinforced. We did reflect orally primarily after guest speaker visits, community member visits. And then in their final reflection, they articulated, okay, now what? You have been informed on all of these topics, now what are you going to do? And to give you, this is a translation. This is done, it was done in the target language, but I translated it for ease of understanding. So how are you going to use this information moving forward? Just to pull out a few things. Learning about bilingualism is learning about someone else's experience. This is the way that I plan on advocating for linguistic diversity. I'm going to educate others about the danger of a single story. That is Adichie's TED Talk. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. By telling others about the lives of bilinguals, it's something that I never knew about, but someone who has lived in the same place and has been involved with the same people all of her life, I think all people, especially the ones in my circle, need to learn about this danger. So while it's not honing in only on Spanish, Spanish is in contact with many different cultures and communities and linguistic communities. So this was a very powerful quote for me in terms of how this learner progressed of her sense of advocacy about this social justice issue. Other authentic assessments could be Osborne recommends highly oral histories. If anybody's trained in sociolinguistics, this is the sociolinguistic interview. I've done many of these. They are transformative. You learn so much from each and one of these interviews. And so your students could certainly do this. In the COVID era, we would be limited to those who had access to technology. But when we're recovering from social distancing, maybe this could be more of a possibility. If it's possible to engage with a community organization, I know that it's very difficult. When I taught secondary, it was challenging. So I know that that might not be viable for everybody, but if there's some sort of partnership that can be established, we've had people here, I haven't done it, but a colleague of mine had their students pitch grant opportunities to our community partner, and they did it in the target language, and then they did it in English for the community partner. So there could be some action and advocacy authentic assessments there. And then an idea that I haven't done, but that could be done, is create a classroom Instagram or Twitter account to disseminate information in the target language. There are, you know, millions of native speakers and people who can understand the languages that we teach. So there could be those virtual communities as well, in a way to act on social justice topics. One more authentic material that I just wanted to point out is Elizabeth Acevedo's Afro-Latina slam poetry resources on teaching tolerance. Teaching tolerance has so many different lesson plans and materials available. I highly recommend that you check those out. Let's see. Tip and task 2. So we want to tap into what is already available online. That is where I get the vast majority of my ideas, research. you know, studies that have already been done, what people are disseminating. And so if you would add in the chat, what resources do you already know of that can inform maybe some decisions, some ideas of social justice education in languages? So if you know of something that already works for you, where's my mouse? Okay. If you want to share it in the chat. Teaching tolerance. Ah, cool. Social justice in the Latin classroom, cool. Yes, and I'll be tapping into those Facebook groups. I have, if I'm being honest, I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook, and I stay on for these resources. It just keeps me hooked in. That's why I like being connected through social media. Okay, so again, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, follow people. There are so many great resources, and you know, you can pick and choose from them as you wish, and they're free. So certainly follow people like Stacey Margarita Johnson, LJ Randolph, other broader organizations. Social Justice Teachers is an Instagram that I found today that I'm following now. I'm on a group called Hispanic and Lusophone Linguistics, and there's so many cool examples of linguistic variation and diversity, and informs my knowledge and gives me memes that I can present to my students and Spanish teachers in the US. I am sure that there are other languages, and as I think it was Mark who said, social justice in Latin. Find your people. And there are some great ideas here and resources. So there was a request for, are there any shows or talks about Indigenous people in Latin America? I'm doing a Identidad y Diversidad unit. And so you have different ideas being thrown around, which is awesome to see. Especially in light of recent events with social tensions and the need for anti-racist resources and discourse, that has been exploding on Facebook. I have a connection or a link to this in the Google Doc, but I mean, fantastic resources that people compile. This was done by Gabriela Cobat Sanchez, and shared it for free for everybody. It was wonderful. And I haven't gone through a tenth of anything that is there, but I hope to do that a little bit more. Yes, and certainly I'm seeing some discussion. Our local organizations, so FLAVA, SCOLT, as well as you know, your specific language organizations are going to have opportunities. Facebook, I mean, there's a lot of events virtually now, so take advantage of them. Here's one with folks who I know in Spartanburg, South Carolina, who are putting a panel together about Latinx resilience during the pandemic as part of Hispanic Heritage Month. And so connecting our students to those events too, if they're virtual and free. And as somebody mentioned SCOLT, there was a SCOLT Dimension edition. I have an article on there on some of the ideas that I just presented to you, but there are other wonderful articles that you can read here, and it is available for free online. I don't think you have to be a member. I think it's free, I think. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Heidi. Again, other resources, the critical and social justice approaches, SIG, I get updates from them daily, maybe every other day, weekly for sure. And there's so many good ideas that are shared. Your local, or not local, I'm sorry, your language specific organization a lot of times has resources, and then different websites. We Teach podcasts, or We Teach Languages podcast, excuse me, Teaching Tolerance, Ed Week, Circle. And Circle, I will say, has a social justice series for language educators. LJ Randolph just presented. Stacy Margarita Johnson is going to present, I think, October 3rd. And then there's another one, the name of the presenter escapes me at this moment, but you can check it out. It's free, so avail yourself of those opportunities. Yeah. Okay, so start small. We've been talking about start small. So where do you think you can start small and incorporate some of these ideas? What is one small tweak? That is definitely what we're aiming for. But what might be an idea or just one simple way that you could recommend to others? For those of you who have been doing this for a while, maybe start with this and see how it goes and then build from there. You can add that to the chat. Diverse picks and discussions, daily quotes, discussion reflection. That's great. And that's, you know, there's not a lot of labor required for that. You fold it into what you do. That's great. So keep those ideas coming. I have a couple ideas. On your websites, I don't know if you give out any kind of information about what the course entails, what your districts require, but you could have a diversity and inclusivity statement on your website to post in your wall, in your classroom, etc. So this is one that I've cobbled together from others that I found online and one that was available to us at my institution. But you can articulate it very clearly for student what, you know, this means and why it's important. And so this is a very small step. It's not related to our goal areas necessarily, but it establishes the, you know, what we need, the basis of having these types of discussion. So that could be one small tweak. And related to languages, we could give students what options there are in terms of inclusive, non-binary options for students. So I know there's other ones other than what is on the left for Spanish. There's also many debates about this, especially between linguists I've seen. I found an article about the push to make French gender neutral from the Atlantic. Not in the target language, but I'm sure you could find one that is. So engaging students and giving them options. If you know, that is something that is very easy to do, but will mean so much for students who want to make use of them. Also, we have these common units as part of what we teach: food, travel, childhood, health, environment, science, technology. And with just a couple tweaks, we could fold in information that touches on social justice topics. So just to mention a few, and I'll let you read them, but potential additions or substitutions for maybe some of the cultural topics that you might mention. With food and cuisine, maybe forgotten influences. Sometimes if students think of a particular genre of cuisine, they don't really understand what brought this particular plate or dish about. The historical, cultural, ethnic influences, I think is very powerful. Where there are food deserts, where the target language is spoken. Just to pull out maybe two more: health and exercise. Who has access to healthcare and who does not. Also in a health unit with my Spanish 2 classes this summer, we talked about the Latinx community and COVID and how the pandemic is impacting our community, our local and national community. So you can see how there are some ways, and I got many of these ideas from Osborne's presentation and just brainstorming what I've done. But you can think about how you can shift what we're already doing and include some of these discussions. To also expound upon this a little bit more. Art and entertainment we did in my Spanish 2 class. I brought in a YouTube video on an Afro-Mexicana dance group. And there are other YouTube videos on Afro-Mexicanos, but this was related to art and entertainment. They watched that and processed that. When we talked about housing and living, we looked at this text on intergenerational living in Spain and why it's almost a necessity for many individuals, young and older. We talked about ageism, etc. Food and cuisine, a connection with underrepresented communities. So this is a YouTube video about Abigail Mendoza and how she approaches her cuisine through Zapoteca traditions. And those are just some, authentic materials, texts that are easily folded in as activities. So no drastic shifts, but I substituted some things that we, historically and traditionally have done with some of these ideas here. And so our last tip and task, collaborate with colleagues. So what are some of the challenges and benefits of collaborating with your colleagues? What might you see as something that is a good outcome of this or something that is difficult? Oh yes, street food on Netflix. Yes, yes, yes. Benefit sharing. Keisha? Did you raise your hand? Would you like to unmute yourself? Is that possible? Eric, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. I hear somebody. Eric, do you know if you could unmute Keisha's? I think she had a question or a comment.
No, I said my apologies. I hit it by accident.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure that that we had time for that. No worries. So yes, benefits and challenges. So many ideas, so little time. Yeah. I think that's perpetual. I feel that too. Right. Not wanting to leave the comfort zone. Yeah, sure. Yeah, more ideas. Yeah. So you don't have to go it alone, right? So depending on who's in your department, having somebody who you can collaborate with, you want to make sure that you do that. If not, inter-institutional district colleagues, so they kind of get your context, your situational factors, and certainly online colleagues have been wonderful. The online community and the different groups that I've shared, and I know there's so many others out there, has really been frankly amazing, especially as the pandemic started. And then in particular with all of the events, spring and summer, people have really responded to that online. And your, as we said before, your organizations, social justice communities, or general communities. Are there any other ideas that you have for how to collaborate with others, or how to brainstorm or pick each other's brains? Twitter, yeah. Certainly. Yeah, well, yeah. It is hard when, people are not open to new mindsets. And it's certainly a challenge. Okay. So we have, we have some time. I was hoping that people could maybe workshop a little bit, or, you know, I want you to decide how you would like to make the use of your time. If you want to bounce ideas off of one another about what you're thinking about doing. So one suggestion could potentially be taking one idea, so one small tweak, one idea, and think through it. You can either talk about it, you can write it down. I want it to be a valuable, I guess we'll do about 15 minutes. So you can see what other people are doing, and you can see what you might want to do. So if you want to workshop that in groups, I think we can have an opportunity for that. Eric, can you help me out with that? I'm going to stop share for a second, and so I can see you, gallery. Is Eric there? My foreign language. We still have 30 participants, which is awesome. Thank you. So with breakout rooms, I think Eric is working on that. Is that right? Well, as we're waiting, maybe if you want to start jotting some ideas down, and we can see how that will work out for us. And if it doesn't, it's okay. Okay, thank you, Heidi. So Eric is on it. Share a link. Okay. Heidi is announcing, don't forget to register for Fall FLAVA Conference. Just out of curiosity, will that be virtual? Yeah.
So I can stall while Eric is, since I'm FLAVA president-elect, while Eric is getting things set. Just a reminder, guys, please, please, please register and come for FLAVA Virtual, October 9th and 10th. I'll put my camera on so you guys can see me. So I'm not just a talking voice. There you go. So October 9th and 10th, it is all virtual. There will be asynchronous sessions, so pre-recorded. You will have access to those pretty much for the whole year, as well as our live sessions, which you also will have live. You'll have access to for the whole year as well. Only $50. 40 of that is your membership fee for FLAVA. 10 of it pays for the conference. So you're getting a conference of over 100 sessions for $10, which is an awesome deal. All languages are represented. Award ceremony will be on the Saturday of FLAVA. I want to say 9 a.m., 10 a.m. I don't have the schedule right in front of me, Sam. I'm sorry. We also, I can announce officially as of today, the Paul Sandrock of ACTFL will be presenting a session at FLAVA. So that is live and official as of today. I just scored to that one for us. So if you have not heard Paul Sandrock, please make plans to attend his session. It's going to be on proficiency in the language classroom. So going to be awesome. Okay, it looks like we've got something coming in from Eric in the chat. Eric, are you on now? Eric. Okay, he put something in the chat, but Eric, are you still there?
We cannot hear you.
We can't hear you, Eric.
No.
Okay, so I will be Eric's wingman right now and cover for him. So Eric put in the chat, thank you for joining. In order for you all to get your credit and certificates, if you can fill out the survey that he has put in the chat, that would be great. Eric, why don't you hit me up with a text and we'll figure this out.
Well, I'll also put it out there. We can just share and talk as a big group.
Yeah, I mean, wait, Eric, I think I heard you.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I don't know what happened. I think it was because I had something connected to, I don't know, one of those wires. In any case, so there's no icon for the breakout rooms on this, and I don't know what the glitch might be with that. In any case, I had allowed participants to unmute. What I was saying, I guess, when I didn't know anybody could hear me, was that I had enabled the participants to unmute themselves if they wanted to ask Dr. Knouse a question, and you know, then we'll be ready to conclude at any time that they, you know, that Dr. Knouse is finished. And I've provided the link to the Survey Monkey, which will also give you a link to an exit ticket. I was going to share with you at any moment. I was going to give you all a sneak preview of the October session when Dr. Knouse is finished.
So would anybody like to share ideas? Maybe something that they will try now or they have already been doing that has resonated with students or has been effective in working on social justice in your language classrooms, as well as targeting the standards and I'm sure your state standards as well. Would anybody like to share before we go into questions and answers? Okay, well, does anybody have any questions or comments, observations? Okay. Well, I will put up on, I will share with you all, as I think this is a good, you know, stopping point before I get into discussing this. I want to make sure to thank you all for attending, for sharing your comments through the chat. I'll talk maybe with Eric and Heidi about whether or not we can save it, because there's some really good ideas there, but I want to be respectful of people's anonymity should they not want. I mean, there's an easy way of saving it and taking out people's names, but you know, I'll leave it up to you. But I wanted to share with you the final slide, which has my contact information. Thank you, Irena. Let me see if I can, okay, yeah, sometimes I have to exit out of that. So here's my email. Please feel free to drop me a line for any reason. And then the Google Doc is a tiny URL. Please feel free to use that as you wish. Whoops.
Can you drop that into the chat box, that URL?
That is a good idea. Yes, I can. Yep. So that should be do the tiny one. So you'll see there are just a sampling of resources, online communities, workshops, available webinars, podcasts, some samples of authentic resources for Spanish, but also some in English, examples of the public service announcements, should you be interested in that. I also have those instructions if you want to email me to get a copy of those. I think they're in Spanish. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it is. So just keep that in mind. And then some of the other references with links to them. So I think that is it for today.